So we've had quite a bit of discussion about the differences between the lithium battery system and the lead acid batteries. So I thought I'd do a bit of a review on the differences between, you know, lithium on the one hand and lead acid on the other, and sort of relate my experience of them both. Now, a lot of people in the off-grid community will say you don't need to spend the money on lithium, you know, they're very expensive, and so on and so on. You know, get a decent quality lead acid battery and you can last for days and days and days off-grid on 100 amp hours lead acid battery. But I wanted to just have a look at the basic differences, my real experience with using both, and being off-grid and on-grid and variously travelling around, and all the different scenarios that we've been in using an inverter. So we'll discuss all those as we go through this video. So what are my experiences? Well, I started off in a Caravan with a basic lead acid battery, leisure battery, to power the lights and whatever else we needed to power, and everything else was on gas. So 100 amp hours in a small Caravan, being off-grid wouldn't be at all bad. And you know, 100 amp hours, given that you can only deplete those batteries to half that, and I didn't know that when we started. So you know, you've only got, with a 100 amp hour battery, you've only got a maximum of 50 amp hours. But what does that mean? What does that really mean? So if you running a 1 amp piece of equipment, and you know, it depends on the type of equipment or what you've got, and so on. But if you look on the labels, on the specifications of any device, it'll probably give you the watts or the amps and voltage, probably the amps, so you'll know how many amps it's using. And an amp hour is the amps that uses times 1 hour, so how many amp hours it's using. So if it's a 1 amp usage device and you run it for 1 hour, that's 1 amp hour. If it's 4 amps, you run it for 1 hour, that's 4 amp hours. Pretty easy to understand. So you've got, in a 100 amp hour battery, you've got 50 amp hours. So you know, you can run 50 1 amp devices for an hour, for example. So all of your lights in your Caravan, if you have them on all evening, you might, you know, they might be on a late autumn or winter's evening. It might be on for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. So you might switch them on at 6 and be on till 11 or 12. You know, so let's say 6 hours. And if you've got all the lights on, you might be using 1 amp, I guess. Depends on type of lights you've got. If they're LEDs, they're lower power. So, you know, you've got a lot going for you there. So, you know, you need to judge the type of stuff you're doing. Anyway, so, you know, we lasted, but we didn't go off-grid in the Caravan very much. So we were on-grid a lot of the time. And if you're plugged into electric hookup, it really doesn't matter what type of battery you've got. So the type of battery you use really matters when you start to go off-grid. And I just wanted to look at the main differences between lead acid and lithium, and which I think is better, certainly for us. So, and I'll tell you about the sort of the experience we've had after I've given you these main differences. So You can deplete a lead acid battery to 50%, or the state of charge to 50%. So you've got half of the rated amp hours. With a lithium battery, you can go to a lot of them go to 80%. Some go to 90 or 95% of the rated. So you're buying a 100 amp hours lithium battery, you'll be able to use 80 amp hours of that. You're buying a 100 amp hour lead acid, you'll be able to use 50 amp hours of that. Bearing in mind, if you continue to do that, that's quite bad for a lead acid battery. But that's another question. Weight. So you're always concerned about the weight of things. You know, you're always limited, aren't you, of what you can take. Lithium batteries, amp hour for amp hour, are about half the weight. I know that a 100 amp hour lead acid battery is going to be about 29 kilos, and a 100 amp hour lithium battery is going to be about 14 kilos. So you're saving a lot of weight if you switch over. Can you draw a lot of power from them? Can you use a lead acid battery with a high powered inverter the same as you can with a lithium battery? Well, you can, but there is a problem with lead acid batteries and inverters, is that you pull too much power out of a lead acid battery too quickly, you can end up damaging the plates in the battery, whereas that's not the case with lithium, or at least that's not what I've experienced. So, you know, the chemistry is different, and I've heard of, you know, very, very big drain on a lead acid battery buckling the plates, and that really kills their efficiency completely. But then you've got to think about the cost. What's the cost of these things? Well, lead acid battery, about £100 for 100 amp hours. Are you sitting down? Lithium, it's about £1,000 for 100 amp hours. So they're 10 times the cost. But how long do they last? Is it worth paying 10 times the amount of money to get a lithium battery, or buying 10 lead acid batteries over time? Well, you can generally say that a good lead acid battery will have about 200 to 300 charge cycles. So that's deplete to 50%, charge back up, deplete, charge up. So about 300, and that normally works out to maybe anywhere between 1 and 5 years, I guess. You know, that it varies, depends on how often you're using it, how much power you're draining, how often you're charging it up, whether it's off charge and you're maintaining it properly. But let's say it lasts 5 years, and then you need to replace it. So I suppose that's about average. With a lithium battery, they are rated to anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000, so 10 times as much. So you're paying 10 times the money, but you're getting 10 times the charge cycles. Now, my experience of charge cycles on lead acid batteries is that when we were off grid on lead acid batteries, and we had 2 of them in the motorhome, the charge very quickly depleted for the way we were using it. We had solar panels just, you know, recharging a bit now and again, and I'll talk about solar panels as opposed to generators in a future video. But the thing is that you're limited on that power drain, because the lead acid batteries do drain the voltage, so you get a massive voltage drop. So what I saw, especially with an inverter, is a lead acid battery with a microwave running for 3 minutes would drop the measurable voltage on the battery to somewhere down around 10.5 volts. But it's supposed to be up at 12.4. But you do the same thing, and bearing in mind that I've got a much higher power, I've got a 3 kVA inverter fitted to my lithium battery now, and I can run the microwave, and the voltage, the measurable voltage, doesn't drop at all, it just maintains. With the lead acid it would drop and would recover a bit, but not quite as much. So there was always a bit of a worry with lead acid against the lithium. So how long does it take to run a charge cycle? Well, I can tell you that I've had the lithium battery for coming up to a year in the van, and it's constantly, because of the way we got things set up, all of the electrics in the van run through the battery, even the 230 volt, even, you know, everything is just running through that. So the battery's being charged, and, you know, we're pulling power through the battery, if you like. So I've had it for a year. How many cycles have I done? Well, it averages out, because, you know, we're not quite at a year, but it's about 1 cycle a week, so about 4 cycles a month. So we're doing about 50 cycles a year, and we've got 5,000 cycles available to us, or as a minimum 2,500 cycles. So if you said 50 cycles, you know, that might last like 50 years, given, you know, the battery cycle rate of 5,000. Take it down to half that. You know, the minimum cycles that you get out of it, 2,500. It could easily last us for the rest of our lives. So I bought a battery once. Okay, you know, I've paid £1,000 per 100 amp hours, 10 times as much as I would have paid for a lead acid battery. But how many lead acid batteries would I have had to buy in the next 30 years? You know, given that I'll live to 90 something, maybe 40 years, I'll live to 100 and have the motorhome. But how many lead acid batteries would I buy in that period? Well, I can tell you that I've already, when we got the first motorhome, we had a lead acid battery, a single lead acid battery in there. When we changed to a 15-month-old van, the lead acid batteries in there were shot, so they had to be replaced. So that's 2 we've bought. They turned out not to be great quality, and they didn't last. I mean, they were depleting with our fairly simple usage within 2 days of, you know, summer usage. So we replaced them with 3 Yuasa EFB 36 batteries, enhanced flooded batteries, so they were sealed, you know. So we had 300 amp hours of batteries. You know, I paid £120 each for those, so quite a high quality battery. And, you know, they were doing us okay, but it still wasn't good enough to run the inverter and so on. So we went for the lithium. You see which way this is going. You know, although the upfront cost for a lithium system is huge. It is, compared to the upfront cost of buying new batteries. If you want to spread your cost out, lead acid, yeah, you buy lead acid batteries every couple of years, you know, it's fine. But for me, I was really concerned about the way the voltage was dropping. On occasion, if the voltage was a bit low, like it wasn't completely fully charged, we would plug in to the 12-volt sockets for a USB charger for the iPads, and the iPads would go, like, continually go on charge, off charge, on charge, off charge. And every time they did that, every time you plug that charge lead in, they go ping. So that's what we found, is that even though the lead acid batteries were fairly well topped up, but below 12 volts, they just weren't powerful enough to give our iPads a good charge. So there's one issue that we had. Another issue was the Wi-Fi booster signal, the system that we purchased, not to be recommended, because it just wouldn't run properly off of the 12-volt supplies that we had unless I connected it directly to a high-powered 12-volt battery, and even then it was a bit iffy. But you know, so there's also all these little niggling issues. It wouldn't run, you know, the inverter that we had was 1500 watt inverter at the time. You know, it just was almost killing the batteries every time we used it for anything. So, you know, a lot of people have said to me after I'd bought all the stuff, well, you know, you shouldn't use an inverter on lead acid batteries. And I guess, you know, that's very good advice. But when we went across to the lithium, installed a 3000 watt-ish inverter, we were able to live as if we're on hookup all of the time, even though we're very often not on hookup. You know, so we can wild camp, go to areas where there's no hookup, drive around, and you know, and it really is like being on hookup all the time. Another thing about lithium is the rate at which you can charge them. They're more accepting of a higher rate of charge. So on board we have what's called a DC battery to battery charger, which runs off our engine alternator, and that pushes about, well, it's rated at 60 amps, and we're able to, while we're driving, we're able to run the fridge, which takes about 12 amps when it's running. Anything else that we want to plug in, like charging the laptop up and stuff like that, on 230 volts. So we can plug all those in while we're driving along, and still the battery's being charged at about 40 amps. You know, so it really is a pretty good way to go. So my recommendation after all this would be that if you want to be off grid a lot and you want to feel like you're on hookup, lithium with a good charger, a good inverter, and we went for the Victron battery, the Victron multi-plus inverter charger combined in one unit. And you know, that unit is about 860 pounds, which might sound very expensive, but bearing in mind that I paid 300 pounds from a 1500 watt inverter, and then a decent charger to go on top of that. So it's not, and it's all built in. It's like, you know, smart switching between hookup and battery, no issues at all. It just works. So, lithium or lead acid? I've chosen lithium. What's your thoughts on what you would need to run your caravan or motorhome for a week or 2 weeks away? Could you go off grid for that long? Let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think. I've gone lithium, spent a whole bag of money on that, and that's sort of the thing that I would recommend when you're buying a caravan or motorhome. Allow for that upgrade. Anyway, I'm going to see you again next time. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.